To be fair, that pipeline is adding 0.5% to our country's collective GDP. Like that is not nothing, and that I'm interested in. Seeing built is a new pipeline, a bitumen pipeline to the Northwest BC. BC just made a huge announcement about the pipeline fight, and it's heating up fast. While Saskatchewan and Manitoba are backing the plan, BC still playing hard to get. Meanwhile, Danielle Smith is pushing $3 billion in Indigenous ownership deals to get this project moving, whether BC likes it or not. To do it. I know that those on the left side of the spectrum like to talk about how to spend money. Well, you can't spend it until you create it. And so let's create the wealth. British Columbia has officially landed itself right in the middle of Canada's latest energy mess. And Alberta just dropped what they're calling a game-changing pipeline plan that's aimed straight at BC's northwest coast. We're not talking about a few barrels of maple syrup trickling through the mountains here. Premier Danielle Smith is proposing a brand new heavy oil pipeline. Yeah, heavy oil, bitumen, for the folks still stuck thinking Alberta only deals in cute slogans and nature shots. The Premier of Alberta seems to contend that if you were to say, well, I'm open to that, and she were to say, I'd like to do whatever I can to convince, this isn't some side hustle either. Smith's calling it a generational project that could crank out 1 million barrels of oil every single day. Do the math, because Alberta sure has. That's a 20 billion payday every year. That's not 20 bucks, it's 20 billion. Money that could actually fund schools, hospitals, maybe even fix a pothole or two. Prioritize a massive public spend like that when a more limited public spend could deliver additional capacity through the pipeline we already own. But of course, British Columbia's Premier David I isn't exactly popping champagne bottles over it. He's already lining up his talking points about economic risks, environmental red flags, and how apparently we've still got unfinished business with the Trans Mountain expansion. You know, that little pipeline project that magically ballooned from $4.7 billion to a casual $35 billion. Nothing like a good old-fashioned taxpayer-funded project spiraling out of control to make private companies run for the hills.
There's no fight here. The concern that I have is a matter of priorities. You know, we have a taxpayer-funded pipeline, the TMX pipeline. It's owned by Canadians. And yet, the funny part, despite all the political bickering, Canada's western provinces are literally sitting on a gold mine of 165 billion barrels of recoverable oil. At today's prices, that underground fortune is worth $9 trillion. But sure, let's keep half of it buried while everyone argues over paperwork and protests. Makes total sense.
With you guys.
We need to deepen our relationship with you. We just don't want to be sending those signals that we're going to hurt them in order to.
But believe it or not, there's still a slim possibility of common sense sneaking into this mess. EIE did say, and you might want to sit down for this, that if Alberta can bring in private companies to fund the thing without begging Ottawa for massive subsidies, he's open to having that conversation.
Which means, I hate this, but if someone else pays for it, maybe we'll talk. That if she's able to arrange that, then we're happy to sit down with Alberta and have that conversation with.
Now, here's where Danielle Smith's plan gets even more interesting. She's figured out that waiting for BC's approval is like waiting for snow in July. So she's cooked up a plan to basically sidestep the nonsense altogether. Enter the Port-to-Port corridor, her workaround to British Columbia's legendary red tape circus.
We've been in active conversations with many pipeline companies, and I feel like we're pretty close to having either one or consortium come forward.
The plan: funnel Alberta's oil straight to BC's ports and out to global markets. We're talking big-name targets here like Prince Rupert and Kamat, both sitting there, ready to be energy export powerhouses if people would stop getting in their own way.
Canadians and all Canadians. I strongly encourage the federal government to pay attention to those projects and help us deliver those projects that are ready to go.
And before anyone rolls their eyes thinking this is just about oil, let me stop you. The pipeline's only part of it. This corridor includes new rail lines, LNG infrastructure, propane pipelines, basically a full-blown export highway designed to move Canada's resources faster than the paperwork piles up.
I think there's going to be any national project that is going to have that considerable amount of value. And let's not forget, What's already been lost? Alberta pumps out 4.2 million barrels of oil a day, but thanks to years of federal interference, stalled projects like Keystone XL, Energy East, and Northern Gateway have cost this country $55 billion every single year.
Imagine what that money could have done. But hey, at least we've mastered the art of blocking prosperity. EI has previously said that if Smith found a proponent and funding and assembles a project, then BC, quote, will certainly cross that bridge. Danielle Smith's proposal doesn't just unlock the West, it shortens shipping times to Asia down to 8 or 10 days. 8 days to get Canadian energy to global markets, instead of waiting months stuck in regulatory limbo. Seems logical, but logic's never been Ottawa's strong suit. TV value, a Biduin pipeline would be talking about 1 million barrels a day in egress. And if you look at today's, speaking of Ottawa, let's not pretend their track record inspires confidence. The Trans Mountain expansion's price tag ballooned from $4.7 billion to $35 billion. That's not inflation, that's incompetence. No wonder private investors avoid new projects like they're contagious. But even with all that drama, Alberta's oil still props up the economy to the tune of $20 billion every year. And funny enough, a big chunk of that cash gets funneled straight into government programs and equalization payments. Translation: the provinces blocking these projects don't mind cashing Alberta's checks. They just hate the industry that funds them. Nothing says teamwork like biting the hand that feeds you, because their partners haven't been treating them fairly. So, I think that this new spirit of collaboration is an important one, and I think that that's the best way. Meanwhile, while Canada blocks its own energy, Ottawa's busy importing oil from Venezuela and Iran, two countries famous for human rights, transparency, and environmental responsibility. Said, does no one ever but, sure, let's block our own clean oil while buying the world's dirtiest. Marwas since a DISA poster that the federal government simply cannot put so many barriers in the way that all the private sector proponents are scared out of the realm. And here's where the numbers get even worse. Canada's lost over $500 billion in resource development investment, $500 billion gone, because Ottawa turns every major project into a funeral procession of red tape and activist press conferences. You don't need a calculator to know that's a disaster. 1 million barrels a day in egress. And if you look at today's prices, that's about $20 billion a year in annual revenue, year after year. Going to markets that want. But thankfully, not everyone's asleep at the wheel. Saskatchewan's Premier Scott Mallows and Manitoba's Wabak Kinu are fully on board with the Port-to-Port corridor. They know the economic spillover isn't just about oil. It boosts agriculture, mining, and overall provincial revenues. Pretty sure their voters care more about paychecks than slogans on protest signs. In the end, while the federal government keeps turning prosperity into paperwork, Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba are building their own future. Whether BC gets on board or keeps clutching their talking points, that's still up for grabs, in which that pipeline across the north happens without significant federal subsidy. Let's talk about the one thing that somehow still triggers political debates in this country: Indigenous partnerships and how they actually get done when people stop making speeches and start cutting real checks. Danielle Smith got a pretty simple approach. She's not handing out promises, she's handing out ownership deals. Alberta's Indigenous Opportunities Corporation has already tossed $750 million into real projects that put Indigenous communities at the table, not in the audience. And get this, they're planning to scale that up to $3 billion. That's not 3 million, that's billion with a B, in real partnerships, real equity, real ownership. Federal subsidy, if the Premier of Alberta is able to deliver it, then let's have that conversation. But I don't see that. Meanwhile, Ottawa's trying to play catch-up. The federal government's been parading around their big announcement about $10 billion in Indigenous loan guarantees. Sounds impressive, right? Until you dig a little deeper and realize critics are saying it's mostly smoke and mirrors. Big announcements, slow results, and somehow all the same problems still hanging around. Alberta's not exactly waiting for Ottawa to figure out how to speed things up. They're already putting money where their mouth is and letting Indigenous groups actually own pieces of the action. What I would say is that we know that we have to have Indigenous ownership, and we've been very progressive on that in Alberta. We were the first to develop with the Alberta Indigenous Courses develops, And speaking of paperwork, let's talk about federal red tape, because Canada's perfected the art of making projects impossible. Bill C-69, lovingly called the No More Pipelines Bill, has turned project approvals into a never-ending obstacle course. Ask anyone in the private sector. It's less about building infrastructure and more about surviving bureaucracy. While Ottawa keeps burying projects in the environmental assessments that drag on for years, the provinces that actually want to get stuff done are running out of patience. Mankspaces to building is a relationship whether the crime over the fact of the environment be created through, for example, Bill C-5, as the federal government is promising it will be, just passed late last week in order to connect, was a placing your access. And here's where it gets funnier. Mankspace is the last week with the two newsmocracy. Canada loves lecturing the world about green energy, but while our projects get blocked, Ottawa's busy importing oil from regimes with environmental records that are a global joke. Venezuela, Iran, the usual suspects. Meanwhile, Alberta and Saskatchewan have been quietly outpacing everyone in actual emissions cuts. Since 2015, methane emissions have dropped by 65% in places like Lloydminster. And oil sands producers have committed to net zero emissions by 2050 using carbon capture and other technologies. But sure, let's keep pretending the dirtiest oil in the world is fine as long as it doesn't come from our own backyard. The pipeline battle's just getting started. Hit that subscribe button because the West isn't backing down anytime soon.